Ask Reddit thread. Doctors and nurses of Reddit, despite knocking before entering a patient's room, what's the strangest thing you've walked into on a patient doing? Woman giving her husband a blowjob, except that she was a patient in the burn unit, admitted after a flash fire from pouring lighter fluid on a barbecue. All the hair on her face was singed off. Her face was super swollen and red, and we had kicked on antibiotic ointment all over her face to treat her burns. Talk about sloppy head. What can you say? The guy's got a ghoul fetish. That just sounds terrible all around. But honey, your whole face is lubed up already. You have to. Paramedic. I'm not sure I even know what strange means anymore. Walking on a dude with a left hand full of poop and a right hand full of his dick that he is furiously jerking. Alright man, just make sure you get in the toilet when you're done, still jerking. Which, yes. I've seen more weird shit in the field than I have at the hospital. Except the wine bottle in the ass and the pen in the dick. Oh my god. Ugh. Had a guy in his late teens/early 20s constantly masturbating. Everyone walked in on it. It was on a floor where the patients were separated by curtains too. Looking back, I think he was an exhibitionist, and he was making us all subjects to his masturbatory fodder. So that was fun. Not super strange overall, but unexpected. Labor and delivery unit saw from the main monitor at the desk that one baby's heart rate had stopped tracing on the fetal monitor. It happens sometimes with position changes during labor, so we went in to readjust. Patient is just sitting there cleaning the just born baby off with the sheets, looking at us like nothing is wrong. Didn't even ring her bell. Wait, what? On second thought, I didn't need you guys. Thanks for the expensive hotel room. Bet you wish all mothers were like that. Can you weigh this fucker so we can leave? I'm missing Jeopardy. I don't get that one. OBGYN checking in. Meth addicted man going down on girlfriend. 1 day postpartum. Think Walking Dead. Eel. Heroin addict injecting into her IV. Preterm labor patient with dilated cervix at 24 weeks. Having what can only be described as porn star level aggressive vaginal intercourse. Number 1, method addict going down on girlfriend. 1 day postpartum. Think Walking Dead. That is just unbelievably scary. Like, I can't get that out of my mind now. Just blood and gore, and what the hell would that have tasted like? And Jesus, that's just frightening. Ugh, gross. A patient was in the middle of committing suicide by jumping from the 5th floor window. Several steel beams lay on the outside ground beneath. The patient had ripped out his catheter and had broken the first or 2 glass layers in the window when I found him. He was standing on a dinner table with cut up feet. I don't know how, but I lifted him down from there as if he were a stubborn child. He had been operated upon for subarachnoidal hemorrhage and was confused. Ripped out his catheter. Ew. I had a patient who kept pulling his IV line out because he said he couldn't get up and move around while attached to the IV pump. He had done it a couple times a shift for a couple of days, and he was a hard stick. I told him he needed to use the call button to ask for help unplugging the pump, etc. if he needed to get up. I also told him that under no circumstances was he to pull the IV out of his arm again. He needed the fluid/medications, etc. Well, a couple hours later, walked into his room, and it looked like someone had been slaughtered in there. The bed was soaked with blood. Blood was spurting out on the walls and furniture, and there were pools of blood on the floor leading to the bathroom. I went to the bathroom, and there he was, standing at the sink, washing his face, with blood pouring out of the IV tube that he broke so that he could get up. I quickly tied the tubing to stop the bleeding, and he seemed dumbfounded about what the big deal was, looking right at me and saying, "You said not to pull the IV out of my arm, right?" This dude's really dumb. I'm not a doctor, but a few years ago I went to visit a friend in the hospital when I walked into the wrong room and witnessed a patient peeing into their own mouth. I was so shocked, I just slowly took a few steps back and quietly left his room. Injecting heroin into his neck. It was weird because he had a PICC line, but he still went for the neck. Not a doctor or nurse, but I am a police officer. We were going to calls at a hospital for a dispute. Walking through the halls of the hospital, I heard someone yell, "Officer, help, help." I walked into the room that the yelling came from, and there was a little bald fat man masturbating violently and just looking deeply into my eyes, snickering. He tricked me. There's been a shooting of my wad. 15-year-old male with abnormal pain. His cardiac monitor starts dinging VTach. Looked convincing on the ghost monitor too. And 3 nurses and a doc caught him masturbating. Gotta check the plumbing. Sex. Terminal patient banging her boyfriend in the hospital bed at like 7 a.m. Can't blame her. Second place. Patient in the process of falling out of bed trying to reach a box of donuts and some fried chicken she had hidden under her bed. I think she also soiled herself before she hit the ground. When she hit the ground, but I can't remember. Oh, that sounds good. Donuts and some fried chicken. I walked into a quadrilytic gangbang with the worst pleasure ulcers I have ever seen. Lower back and both hips had bones completely exposed, septed wounds, all of them. Getting a lap dance from his underage girlfriend, who was topless, rubbing herself against his flaccid, fully cathetered penis. I stood there for a second, turned around and closed the door trying to understand what I had just seen. The girl got dressed and walked past me as fast as she could. When I entered the room again, the patient just said, with a grin, "She missed me, doc." Fuck, quadriplegic gangbangers are getting more action than me. You would be very surprised at how much old person fucking is going on. Most of the time, it's when a man is in the hospital and his wife comes to visit him. They just climb right into those beds and get freaky. God bless the horny, geriatric bastards. When hooked up to a heart monitor, they can freak out some nurses. First internship in a geriatric ward. What is that? Geriatric ward. Geriatric ward. Me and my fellow students walk into a patient's room who is screaming like crazy. He was known for having serious dementia. We open the door and my student colleague gets a warm handful of shit thrown right in his face. Needless to say, I was quite surprised, but happy I missed the brown rocket. Gross. I'm a hospital chaplain. I was sitting at the nurse's station in the cardiac ICU, and we kept hearing rhythmic thumping coming from one of the patient's room. When we entered, we saw the patient sitting on the edge of his bed with a Foley bag in his hand, and it was still inserted. Upon asking what he was up to, he told us he was fishing. Then he tossed the Foley catcher bag away from him across the room. When it hit the end of the tubing, it stopped and fell to the floor, noticeably jerking his penis underneath his gown, at which point he pulled it back in, like a fishing line, and proceeded to repeat. The nurse, a grizzled old Navy vet, chuckled and asked how the fishing was. Good. The nurse tells him to stop or he'll hurt himself. He doesn't really want to, but eventually we talk him into it. After we get him back in bed, the nurse asks if he has any pain. The patient responds that he never felt better. As far as I know, he didn't go back to fishing, though. What? Gross. After we get him back into bed... Oh, wait. Altered people do strange stuff, but at least he didn't rip it out or do some serious damage. TLDR, patient ICU believes he's fishing, throws Foley bag still attached to the Foley catheter that he had inserted to try and catch fish. This is where I close Reddit and look for something else to do. 2 teenage girls in a children's hospital for sickle cell were in the same room together and were discussing the nice things their pimp bought them. One girl had received a nice handbag, the other one had received something less nice. They then, after more discussion of their pimps, realized they had the same pimp, causing the girl who got worse things to try and steal the other's handbag, saying that she deserved it more or something. This led to them fighting and pulling out each other's central lines. Bloody mess. But one of my favorite stories. Got to love Oakland. Well, that's depressing. Was anything done for them being teenage prostitutes? CPS and social workers, among other services. We try our best to get them connected with any service that might help, but in these types of situations, it is hard to help people that do not want help. The only thing more awkward than walking in on a patient using their central line to inject heroin is having to listen to them try to convince you that they were not just using their central line to inject heroin. I see lots of disparaging comments towards patients who suffer from addiction. I post this because it was an awkward interaction I had very early in my medical career. Let's not forget that as awkward and embarrassing as it was for me, the situation was surely worse for the patient. We are both human beings doing our best to get through a hard day. Well, nurse, as you can see, this heroin appeared in the room and I'm trying to get rid of it for the safety of this hospital. I'm a clinical laboratory scientist, but in school I had to do the phlebotomy rotation. I would follow a phlebotomist in the hospital and she did her rounds. The weirdest thing was dealing with crazy patients. The phlebotomist was black and I vividly remember an old lady calling her a filthy in exclamations and screaming to her husband that this Yankee in exclamations is trying to sell me shoes. I don't want no shoes. One of the creepiest things was one night we walked into a patient's room. It was dark and we realized the room was empty. Or so we thought. When we turned around, the door eased closed and we realized the patient had been hiding behind the door. She was an older woman, maybe late 50s, with long, greasy white hair down to her waist. She looked at us with pure hatred, and it scared the absolute shit out of us. Then the phlebotomist said, "Miss Johnson, we are from the lab. We are here to draw your blood. Is that okay?" And the lady just said, "No, get out." We noped the fuck out of that. Number 1, parents having sex in the hospital bed while their 15-year-old child, the patient, is sleeping. 2, child putting Play-Doh in the Jackson Pratt right after having a liver transplant. What? 3, nurse kneeling in front of a teen patient had the patient's back to me so I couldn't see what the nurse was doing, and the patient says, "Yes, that feels good this way." Turns out she was only changing the batteries on his ankle. 4, as I open my patient's room, I can only see the doctor dancing on furniture. For the uninitiated, like me, a Jackson Pratt drain, also known as a JPD drain, is a closed-suction medical device that is commonly used as a post-operative drain for collecting bodily fluids from surgical sites. The device consists of an internal drainage connected to a grenade-shaped bulb via plastic tubing. Oh, it's just grenade, right? Grenade. For some reason that seems like it's spelled weird. If he didn't post anything, I would have gone the rest of my life believing she meant his butthole. Not a doctor, but paramedic that spent time working in the IMCU early in my career. I was monitoring patients' telemetry, basically like watching and EKG for 12 hours, and noticed our recent trecht had a hole cut in his neck to allow him to breathe. Patient's heart rate was increasing and he was having abnormalities in his EKG that were not resolving. Paged the nurse and she knocked on the door and upon entering found his wife riding him hard. She was like a deer in the headlights and then slowly backed out. It was hilarious. Definitely was not expecting the guy's wife to be having sex with him while he has a new track. But hey, that's love. Damn, a lot of these are using so many technical words. Really testing my pronunciations skills. No poles in the patient's room, but that didn't stop them from getting a lap dance from a lady who was clearly not wearing a nurse's outfit because she worked there. Wow. definitely watched this porn before. I was doing a safety watch and a guy just started jerking off. He didn't even get hard, but he came. That's impressive. That motherfucker could roll a boat with a rope. Walked in on a patient's wife giving him a hand job while he had a catheter in. He looks at me and says, "Son, you never waste a hard-on." There's so many. I had no idea what a catheter was until today, and now it's in so many of these stories. Working in a neuro/psych, the strangest things I've walked in on was a fully cognitive 18-year-old male having sex with his biological mother. What? The sex was consensual, and they both seemed to be enjoying themselves. However, needless to say, the mother was denied a private presence and given limited visiting hours after that. That motherfucker. So, were his arms broken? Ha ha ha, I told this story to a fellow student when I was in nursing school, and to my surprise, that was his same response, but he was actually the one that seemed to be more in command. L&D nurse walked in on a laboring patient squatting over the floor trying to poop, right next to the bedside commode she had just been situated on. She said that it felt more natural. Edit pew. Okay, yes, it's better to squat to do the deed. It was odd because she was squatting on the floor with nothing underneath to catch her impending bowel movement. I am constantly horrified by poop stories from nurses. I work on the GI floor. After a 3-day stretch, I can tell who shit the bed by smell alone walking down the hall. It's my cross to bear. Oh my god, that sounds like a terrible job. This is why I have zero interest in healthcare. Not enough pay in the world to deal with that. Oh my god. I like it. I have done just about every low-level job from fast food to manual labor to call centers to lifeguarding, and nursing is by far my favorite. I get to meet a zillion different people and make bonds that many other professions could never hope to have. I get to exercise my critical thinking and problem-solving skills constantly while being able to call on help whenever I could possibly need it. I only have to work 3 days a week, and anything beyond that is overtime. The crazy situations and surprises like that when an emergency happens is the reason I go to work. I love stuff like that because you just let your training take over and your coworkers get the problem dealt with. The sense of satisfaction of getting that man all situated in such a short amount of time and back in bed asleep before he knew what happened is what I live for. The worst part of the job is another situation at work where the doctors are talking about taking one of my patients to a palliative care, make them comfortable while they die because his cancer is coming back and he is in so much pain. The issue is that he doesn't know any of that yet. They just found out about it late last night. That part makes me sad. Warning, very, very not safe for life. That kind of makes me not want to read it. How bad could it be? I'm not a nurse, but was married to one for 15 years. She was in neuro ICU. Neuro nurses are a group with startlingly well-developed black humor. So, when I was invited to her work parties and such, I took to entertain myself by wandering around asking people for their worst stories. The all-time winner walked in on a post-surgical patient sitting on the trash can, drinking his own brain fluid and shitting. Ew. As I understand it, he had a tube venting fluid from the ventricle of his brain, not unusual post-neurosurgery, to keep the pressure down. I'm not sure what sort of device it normally vents into, but he had ripped the end of that, put it in his mouth, and was sucking on it. Ugh. That's gross. Worked labor and delivery one night. This younger, about 16 to 17 girl was in labor and had pregnancy-induced hypertension. She was in the room with her boyfriend when we heard him scream. We ran in there to find her giving him a blowjob, which isn't all that unusual in hospitals, but see, here's the thing. If blood pressure gets high enough, people will have seizures. And when people have seizures, they tend to bite down very hard. We had to basically pry this girl's mouth away from his penis. Oh. Oh my god, that's the worst. Well, if he didn't learn not to get someone knocked up before that moment, he sure as hell learned now. Nope, 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 Open, that's kind of what she was doing. How does this happen? Does he still have his penis? Yes, he does. He had to get a few stitches, but was otherwise fine. Congrats, mate. My dick shriveled up and reacted so far that there's just a crater. An addict injecting her own feces into her IV line so she could justify staying in the hospital longer to con someone into giving her Dilaudid. I'm not gonna try to pronounce medicine names. Okay, maybe this is a stupid question, but wouldn't that do some serious damage to her, or was she not really successful with it? It is. It causes spasms. She was in her mid-20s, addicted to narcotics, and had end-stage renal disease. She died a few weeks later. Sucks for her. At a retirement home for elderly folks with severe dementia, there's this one guy that is always silent, but cheery. Always smiling, waves you when you acknowledge him. One day out of the blue, he stops me in the hall and raises his finger toward a room with the sternest scowl I have ever seen. He says in the deepest, most movie trailer narrator voice I've ever heard in this person, This is the room. Upon entering the room, I found that he was directing all of the wandering residents into this room. It had like 4 people crammed into this little studio unit. Oh, that's funny. I walked in on 2 ladies getting it on. I apologized. Told them I'd give them a few minutes to finish up and come back later. I'll give you a few minutes to finish up. Stands in corner. Go on. During my first clinical rotation for nursing, a classmate of mine did an assessment on an older patient and came out saying she is absolutely a suicide risk. I'm getting her actual nurse. Turns out the patient's husband had passed away, and she was talking about how she missed him, along with saying things like, I'm just tired of doing this. I just want to see him again, and life just seems so pointless now. These are huge red flags for suicide risk. The classmate asked another classmate to go in and stay with the patient until the nurse could come in to check on her. When the other student walked in, the patient had a handful of her blood pressure meds. She dropped them on the ground and started crying. First time ever being nurses, and we had a patient almost kill herself. Absolutely insane. Second day on the job, and a patient in labor ward tried to kill herself due to postpartum psychosis via electrocution. I spent the entire night in suicide watch. She stuck her hand to the socket of a light bulb. Had to amputate most of her index finger. Her family wanted to take her out the next day for an exorcism. Not me, but my mom is a nurse that works in intensive care. She told me there's one patient who wouldn't talk to anyone except for one of her coworkers, Debbie. So naturally, Debbie was the one who always got this patient. When he spoke to her, he would be sincerely sweet and super nice, always trying to be a gentleman. Well, one day, Debbie wasn't there and my mom got to take care of the man. When she went to check on him, he was scribbling on a notepad, and as he noticed her, he tried to hide the notebook and accidentally dropped it on the floor. My mom picked it up, and as she handed it back to him, she skimmed over what he had written. For days, he had been scribbling in the dark, writing, "Fuck Debbie," and "Kill Daddy," "Kill Debbie," and disturbing stories about him murdering her. He was transferred to the mental ward shortly after. Wow. That's the definition of a Debbie Downer. I was about to perform a colonoscopy. And the patient was shoving M&Ms in his rectum, said he wanted to give me an Easter egg hunt. Edit. They were larger peanut M&Ms, at least a small bag's worth. The nurses wouldn't eat them. Gross. I found a patient dead in her bed once, barely half an hour after I last saw her. Being awake, well, and confident she'd be discharged in a few days. Oh, that's sad. I am a student midwife. One of the midwives I have worked with walked in on a couple having sex in a private room in an attempt to induce labor themselves before the doctors could get it at them. They didn't even notice. Not me, but a coworker. According to her, psych patient was picking scabs off his abdomen, and eating them. Edit. All y'all are nasty. I had a patient, hepatic encephalopathy. Holy shit, fuck that word. I walked into his room to give him a cup of water and he was drinking out of his urinal. Ew. Strange but understandable, as the patient was very confused and quite old, and on some good stuff. Walked in to pick up a tray, food service, and the patient had his knife, just a butter knife, and was trying to saw out his catheter, but up higher than in exposed parts of the catheter. I convinced him to give me the silverware before he could saw through his penis, or at least lacerate it pretty good. Hit the call button and made sure Nursey knew what was going on. Seen plenty of other strange things, as the floor I work on is a psych ward, and another wing is oncology. They're often on some strong stuff, and also brain cancer makes you do odd things. This one just stuck out the most. I had a patient with dementia who constantly carried around a Bible. Apparently, I resembled her daughter, and she would call me by her daughter's name. Every time I walked into her room, she would scream at me for fucking that boy and hit me with her Bible. It was an interesting shift. Wasn't me, but a nurse I worked with walked in on a patient and her visitor doing the dirty. And by dirty, I mean dirty. Imagine the amount of gross shit that's gone down the ER, not to mention the woman was not exactly ladylike. Turns out the patient was a hooker that would occasionally bring her Johns to the ER to have sex. She knew to say she had a lady problem, so that she got a room with a door that's kind of in the corner. I guess if you need a room with a bed, the ER isn't a bad place, although possibly the grossest setting possible. Needless to say, whenever she checks in now, she's no longer allowed to close the door. In a slightly related story, there was another guy who was so tall that he could stand up and see above the height of the curtain. He also happened to be a chronic masturbator. He'd either call the nurse into the room so they'd see him going to town on his dick, or he'd stand up and stare at all the nurses while he beat off. He's also not allowed to close the curtains anymore. Did that stop him? Kinda. He still tried to do it under blankets, but whenever someone saw him start, they'd yell, "Hey, blank, stop it now." That usually did the trick. He was also exclusively given male nurses, and all the female nurses would go sit on the complete other side of the ER, regardless of where their patients were. Me. Ma'am, he's having a heart attack. We're about to fly him out to get a heart cath. Please stop giving him a blowjob. Aw, shit, dude, I'm probably gonna die. Let me bust a nut before I go. You have 5 minutes until the helicopter lands. Format. Edit. Did I mention it was the middle of the day and they were both wearing pajamas? Hey, it takes all kinds, right? Don't know why everyone's bitching and complaining. Just because I didn't hold his hand, cry with his girlfriend, pray for him at the bedside, give him a hug before he left, nor fix his family a tray full of hot cocoa doesn't mean shit. We saved his life, probably, so he can get more BJs, watch TV, and spend his disability check, my fucking taxes, at Walmart. I don't care about him at all. If you think nurses should pour out tender loving care to everyone, well, you need both medication and to stop watching TV. Meanwhile, the rest of us cold-hearted real nurse bitches got some real fucking work to do. Suck it, warmly said through sweetest smile. Okay. Husband changing his infant daughter on the floor of the ER room. No pad, no protection. Right there. Bare ass on the floor, where hundreds of different sick people walk and track all kinds of diseases, where infectious bodily fluids have been splashed and were poorly cleaned up. Gross. Not a medical professional, but I had a doctor tell us a story about them monitoring an expectant mother. She was hooked up to normal heart rate monitor as well as the baby heart rate monitor. All of a sudden, both heart rates spike very high. When they go to investigate, they find the mother smoking crack in the hospital waiting to deliver her baby. Well, I mean, when you want crack, it's not like you're just gonna stop just because you're giving birth. Definitely walking on the patient with the blood pressure cuff around his neck and pumping it to see how high he can get it before he passed out. It was interesting to say the least. Embarrassment ensued. This happened to another nurse, the married father of a 12-year-old patient who just had open heart surgery and was heavily sedated. Was hitting on a nurse I work with. At 10 p.m. he mentioned she looked stressed and offered to massage her. She declined and laughed it off. At 12 a.m., she went back in the room, and he tried to massage her back without asking. She told him no in no uncertain terms and figured that was the end of it. At 4 a.m., she walked in, and he was standing there naked and tried to seduce her. She called security, who then called his wife, explaining to her why she had to come pick up her husband at 4 a.m. in the morning and why he was no longer allowed in the hospital. Edit. Change for slightly more clarity. Alright. There's a lot of gross-ass stories.